For about 200 years, India was ruled by Britain, one of the greatest imperialist powers of the 19th century. In 1858, British Crown rule was officially established, ending a century of control by the East India Company. The colonizers made their laws and rules, which Indians accepted and followed. Slowly, the English culture and practices saw themselves being accepted in Indian society. When India gained independence in 1947, most of the colonial era laws were adopted by the Indian government. Despite new legislation enacted, India is still showing signs of a colonial hangover even after 74 years of independence. 7 decades have passed since the colonizers left India, but the legacy continues in sectors such as the military, judiciary, policing, and even cricket. The Board of Control for Cricket in India is still using the logo derived from the British regime in 1928. Senior advocate N.L. Raja, a member of the Madras High Court's Heritage Committee, pointed out that a colonial psyche remains in the administration of justice through the Indian court system. Judges in India are still referred to as my lord and your honor. The Sahayaks are the buddy system, whereby soldiers are assigned to army officers to help them maintain the weapons and equipment, was prevalent since British days. The Indian Army is considering recruiting civilian staff ever since reports of soldiers being treated like servants made headlines, and the rise in cases of soldiers coming out openly against it. The brutal practice of lathi charge by the police force to control unmanageable mobs was a practice that the British used as a tool to repress the satyagrahis who challenged their regime. The main criminal code for the country, the Indian Penal Code, was enacted 161 years ago in 1860. It contains some sections which are outdated and need to be repealed. One such provision is Section 124A, which relates to the offence of sedition or exciting disaffection against the government. It is an archaic law that has been abolished in Britain but continues in India. The present civil services in India were formed after 1947, but it was Warren Hastings who laid its foundation in India in the 19th century. While addressing a group of IAS officers in 2019, Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for all officers to shed the colonial legacy which persists in the civil services. Till today, the British method of periodization of history based on religion is still widely accepted. The color of the Indian police forces is khaki, which was prevalent since 1847. The system of driving on the left-hand side of the road was started in India by the British in the 1800s, and another legacy of the colonial era is the practice of having peons in government offices. When the British came to India, they brought with them an education system that tried to eradicate superstitious practices and beliefs. The linguistic influence had a long-term effect on the social and cultural lives of Indians. Eventually, English was adopted as the official language of the legal and education system. Former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, in a speech given at Oxford University, remarked that the British-derived institutions have served the country exceedingly well. Meanwhile, measures are being taken to deviate from the colonial era practices. One being the change in the budget presentation timing to 11 a.m. instead of 5 p.m. by the NDA government in 1999. Presenting the budget at 5 p.m. was a tradition from imperialist times. In April 2013, a parliamentary committee headed by Vice President Venkaiah Naidu had recommended the government to abolish the Sahayak system as it affected the morale of the soldiers. The colonial hangover of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code is also history. This section criminalized consensual same-sex relationships. It was introduced by the British in 1861 and struck down 157 years later by the Supreme Court of India in 2018. The new National Education Policy 2020 aims at fighting the colonial hangover by shifting from the Eurocentric structure of education to a pluralistic contextual structure. As India is approaching its semi-sesquicentennial celebrations, there is a need to repeal certain archaic laws, outdated policies, and colonial-era rules which should be replaced with laws that apply to the Indian system of governance and that reflect the 21st rather than the 19th century.